Okay, so welcome to lesson 2 on measuring crime and deviance. In this lesson, we're going to have a look at a bit of a recap on official statistics, and then we're going to focus a little bit more on the victim surveys and the statistical data, what victim surveys are, and some of the evaluations of victim surveys. So before we get started on victims, we're going to go back and have a recap on the court and prison records. For this, you're going to undertake a little piece of research. So if you can get yourselves to a computer or access to a phone, if you're going to use a phone, that will be helpful. So as we mentioned last lesson, court records are quite useful as they do show the number of criminals who are being prosecuted in the court system that have been charged with particular offences. And as we know, not everybody gets a custodial sentence and not every court case is successful. So the court records do give us a summary of who's getting charged and prosecuted, what kinds of crimes they are for, regardless of whether or not the court system then sort of commits them to prison. But what I would like you to have a look at is the actual prison statistics for the UK at the moment. So I want you to produce a detailed A4 summary sheet of the key statistics in this area, and you're going to upload that to this lesson on Teams. This summary sheet needs to include statistics as up to date as you can get them. They produce them every 3 months, so you should be looking at data sort of towards the end of 2021 if you can. If you can't find that level of data, that's fine, as long as it's within the last 3 to 5 years. That's considered up to date and contemporary for any exam content. What I would like you to do is have a look at the statistics broken down into a number of different categories. The first two in that bullet point there with the offender's ethnicity and gender is extremely relevant to your next topic, which is the distribution of crime, criminality and victimology. So that will help you set the scene for the discussions around age, ethnicity, gender, and so on when we're looking at who is the criminal and who is the victim. It's also really useful to break down the prison population into the types of offences that people have committed. This gives you an idea of what kinds of offences result in custodial sentences, because obviously there are a number of crimes that are not included in prison statistics. Smaller crimes, petty crimes, and so on. So it's useful to kind of see who our prison population reflects in that sense. And then add a couple of evaluation points. Think about your methodology as well. So positivism, interpretivism, subjectivity, objectivity, quantitative and qualitative data. But also think about the people, so the ethnicities, the genders, the types of offences. When you're considering the advantages and disadvantages of prison statistics as a reflection of a crime and deviance. Think about what we talked about last lesson in terms of police priorities, the police success rates, what kinds of crimes they choose to first of all begin to investigate and why they may investigate those, and draw that together into a few evaluation points. So research tasks should take you about 20 minutes. So you can either pause the video and do that now and come back, or you can watch the remaining content on victim surveys and then undertake the task for 20 minutes at the end. So we're going to move on to victim surveys as a source of measurements of crime. So if you can turn to page 11 in your booklets. Okay, so we mentioned last lesson in the little intro to victim studies. The British Crime Survey is now more widely known as the Crime Survey for England and Wales. However, that's quite a recent change. So a lot of the research and studies and data comes from the old BCS. So the terms British Crime Survey and Crime Survey for England and Wales are used interchangeably depending on when the research was taking place and where the statistics have come from. For your exams, it's fine to reference British Crime Survey or Crime Survey for England and Wales alongside the data that you're using, depending where the data's come from. So if you have a look at the information on page 11, if you want to read through that and make notes of the key points as we go through the information on the slides. So as we mentioned, victim surveys do try and overcome some of the limitations of crime statistics and official statistics. This is because they ask victims to report what types of crimes they've been a victim of, regardless of whether or not they've reported it, whether or not the police investigated. It's all about focusing on that victim and using victimology to get an understanding of the sort of more specific nature of crime that is taking place. So the Home Office does carry out an awful lot of the victim studies. They ask individuals from gathering a stratified sample wherever possible, but again, we talked about sampling issues last lesson, and it may be disproportionately skewed. So if you get a representative sample of the population, that may not be a representative sample of victims. It is known that you are more likely to be a victim of a crime at a young age, so under 25, if you are in a poor, deprived or working class area, and if you are male. So representative of the population is not necessarily representative of victims. People are asked whether they reported the crime and whether the police recorded them. So it does try and get a bit of information as to, you know, were you a victim? Did you report it? Did the police actually do anything about it? So it gives that broader perspective. Okay, so if you have a look at the information through page 11 and 12 and highlight and make notes on some of the key points that are raised there about victim studies. Some of the key things that you might want to pick out on second paragraph, 2008 survey used face-to-face structured interviews with people aged over 16 in England and Wales, and there were nearly 47,000 interviews that were conducted. It's really important for your crime and deviance section here that you are making links to your research methods understanding. So when you're evaluating something like the 2008 survey, right, you need to be talking about what are the issues with face-to-face structured interviews. For example, if you send out a male interviewer to interview a young female who was a victim of sexual assault, she is not going to be that responsive to that person asking those kind of sensitive questions. So one of the really important things for this section is to draw on that research methods content, use your PET evaluations, particularly focus on the application and the nature of the research that's taking place into crime and deviance to measure it and how people may respond to that kind of stuff. So if you can read through the remainder of page 11, going through the evaluations onto page 12, right, and just stop towards the end with the problems identified by Kroll. Okay, so your homework to draw together the information on victim surveys is to read the extract that's in your booklets on page 13 and have a go at questions 1 to 5. Now, I do not want you to do these as essay questions or anything like that. you just need to use those questions to make some summary notes, to go back to check that you understand the key features within victim surveys and how to tackle some of these issues. For example, trying to be representative, which groups might be underrepresented, what types of crimes may be excluded, and so on. So just making sure that you are able to connect the dots and understand some of the strengths and weaknesses and issues around victim surveys. I don't need you to submit your notes for the homework. I do want the research task submitted, but not the homework task. So you don't need to make a submission of this, but if you do want me to have a look and to check them, by all means, you can attach that to the lesson task as well. So that bit's up to you, but I'm not expecting you to submit these. These are for your own thought processes and drawing together the information that you've got. Okay, so if you can turn to page 14 for me, and we will have a look at self-report studies. So victim surveys are just one type of self-report study. The other forms of self-report study, as we mentioned, tend to focus on being gathered by agencies that are not formal agencies of social control, or they include surveys on asking individuals to declare whether or not they have been an offender. So have they committed a crime or criminal offence? It relates very much to this idea of what we call a data explosion and risk society. So one of the things that has been happening since sort of it's been possible to gather really wide scale research and data is that the statistics on crime, deviance, antisocial behaviour and so on have become phenomenal. There are people gathering data on criminality for all sorts of purposes, and the idea is that this gives us a picture of crime and criminality. Now we know it's flawed, and what happens is it draws about this idea that we live in a risk society, so we're at more risk of crime, more risk of harm than we previously were. So information that has been gathered across different areas of crime through self-report studies include the 4 points that you can see on screen. So if you can make a note of these in the boxes on page 14. Your first is unreported and unrecorded offences. Now this is connected through the crime survey, through victim surveys, but as we know, it still remains flawed. Specialist subcategories of crime. The crime statistics are beginning to break crimes down into such precise, fine detail that there are hundreds and hundreds of different categories that are recorded in the official statistics. Hidden crimes are a new area that self-report studies are beginning to look at. The dark figure of crime, things like sexual offences, domestic violence, is something that's been, evidently missed for many, many years. But we are now moving towards gathering data as well on things like white-collar crime and corporate crime to give us a bigger picture of all the social harms that come from crime from all angles. And one of the most important things, which kind of comes from a realist perspective, is the idea of victimology. Now this is to collect information from the victims of crime to find out how they feel, what they want, how they want justice to be delivered, and what impact crime has actually had on the victim. It's all well and good recording who's committed a crime or what crime have they done, but actually one of the most important things is what does the victim feel as a result of that crime? What can we do as a society to support those victims? So just make sure you've got those written down in the boxes. Pause the video if you need to, and then we'll have a look at the remaining information. Okay, so research from Garland talks about how it's not just the sheer volume of knowledge that has started to accumulate around crime statistics, but also linked to sort of modernity, and the way in which sort of governments and various agencies of control have become more and more and more concerned with controlling crime and punishing criminals. It's become a political podium. The tougher you are on crime, the more the public seem to want to, support you and vote you into government. So it's become a political issue in modern society, as opposed to a social issue with which people need to tackle both the cause and consequences of crime. So part of the sort of risk management element of dealing with crime and dealing with the nature of crime, according to Garland, has kind of been pushed back onto the public. It's commonly referred to as victim blaming in wider society, but this kind of has come from a number of consecutive Conservative governments and that right realist perspective. So if you're a victim of crime, is it because you didn't lock your door? Is it because you left your bike unchained? Is it because you didn't lock your car? Is it because you were walking home late at night across a park? And that concept of pushing responsibility back onto victims is very much informed by official statistics. So Garland talks about how the statistics are not only gathered for understanding criminals, but helping or informing individuals about how they're supposed to not be a victim, how they can prevent crime happening to them. Okay, so one of the issues with self-report studies, and again, think back to your research methodology here, you're asking people for their own opinion. There's going to be subjectivity, there's going to be that issue of, do they even know they've been a victim of crime? Would you know if you've been a victim of air pollution? All those different issues will affect and make the data flawed. So there is, first of all, a problem of validity. Respondents might lie, so they might say they have or they haven't. They could exaggerate. They might be mistaken with something that happened, whether something is a crime, whether something is not a crime. Representativeness is an issue in any study using self-report. Unless you can access the entirety of the population, it's very difficult to get a representative sample, which means that your findings are limited in terms of generalizability to your target population. Young people and students tend to be the most common participants for self-report studies on crime and deviance, predominantly because an awful lot of universities undertake a lot of social research, and these people are easy access. It's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to get your hands on a drug trafficker, mafia boss, people smuggler. They're not as easy to access for self-report studies. So there are issues of representativeness. And there are also issues of relevance, right? It may be that if you're going to do self-report studies, people may confess anonymously. So, yeah, do you know what? I stole a book from a shop, right? They're not going to confess, yeah, I murdered like 27 people and I've not been caught yet. It's great. It's not going to happen. So most of the crimes that are uncovered from self-report studies tend to be quite trivial, theft, vandalism, that kind of stuff. And it tends not to be kind of a picture of the real issues around crime and deviance. Okay, so that brings you to the end of the actual video lesson, and your task is to read the information about social construction of official statistics and attach the fact sheet summary to the lesson tab on Teams, so submit it as you would a normal assignment. So in terms of this lesson, you're to complete the summary sheet and you are to undertake the research on prison statistics and submit that. Now you can do that in pairs if you wish, but each person will need a copy of the prison statistics and the data that they find out. Right, so summary sheets on screen now should take you about 10 minutes. A lot of this we've covered. A lot of this will help you sort of track back and recap and revise, and then around 20 minutes for your A4 summary sheet for statistics, and then the remaining time to complete that homework task, which to be fair you should be able to do in the last as well, with the quick recap questions. As I said, you don't need to submit the recap questions, but I do want you to submit your summary of this fact sheet and your A4 research sheet into prison statistics. So again, any problems, drop a message on Teams, send me an email, or ask me when I see you on Monday.